Isn't that the line that someone like John Kerry takes, that China is also affected by climate change? So obviously they're going to have to make reforms. Let's work with them to make these reforms.
Yeah, but that is true. And Kerry is not wrong. But where he's wrong is that China, their priorities are not improving the environment. Their priorities are to build an industrial state that is dominant around the world, and the welfare of their people takes second place. So until they've assured themselves that their sprint marathon, maybe is a better word, to become dominant in the dominant industrial power in the world, they're not gonna take what the steps that they need to take to improve the environment.
Do you think there's is there acknowledgement in the policy of the CCP that they do have to reckon with some of these things, like
The water
the water
sounds
tables,
crazy.
or perhaps they don't really necessarily want to deal with like the coal power issue or things like that, but is there any acknowledgement that they're going to have to do something to solve these issues?
Rhetorically, there is. She has started to use the term ecological civilization, with the implication of, deep concern. But granted, he's starting to talk about that, but their actions have not followed the rhetoric.
I also wonder if there's any sign that they're kind of like exporting some of the way that they've exported their excess industrial capacity through the Belt and Road. So if there's uh, dirty mining to be done for rare earths, if they kind of export that to Africa instead of doing it in China, or if they're exporting any of these like highly polluting or environmentally detrimental things to other countries.
Well, I mean, to me, that's ought to be a priority for uh, the West. I mean, to use an oversimplified term, I mean, they're not only challenging us in terms of economic leadership, um, they they provide an opportunity for us, you know, um, given all kinds of agreements that China has entered into around over the course of the last 30 or 40 years. I mean, starting with the World Trade Organization. Um, but I think there needs to be more recognition on the part of the West that, for instance, China, because of their control of the rivers coming out of Tibet and the Himalayas, they have a lot of leverage which they're using over Southeast Asia. They could in India. I mean, another sort of colorful detail is China has been talking about for years a mammoth new hydro project in the southern Himalayas that would produce 3 times the power of the Three Gorges Dam. And it's on the so-called Brahmaputra River, which goes into India and then into Bangladesh. It has if they carry through on their plans, and it's in the latest 5-year plan, it would involve a series of dams and tunnels that have a vertical drop of over 6,000 feet through the mountains. if they do that, that would be a huge ecological bet, because you move is so much dirt, you move a lot of water, you build these huge reservoirs. It's an earthquake-prone area of the world. So anyway, if they go ahead with stuff like that, I mean, there should be pushback from India, South Asia, and we ought to help them. With the timber problem around the world and deforestation problem.
Oh, hang on. I just want to ask about this project. This is the Great Bend mega dam you're talking about, right?
Right.
So they had started planning for this many years ago, but they haven't actually done it yet, right?
Right.
So what, understandably, India would be unhappy. That would be an understatement. Because even if it doesn't curtail their water supply, it'll still have major ecological impacts downstream, right?
Right. They would be able to control the flow. So,
right.
The monsoon would be, I'm not an expert on this, but could be undercut. What they've done on the Mekong River has tended to really hurt the aqua, the fish industry, fish ponds, which in Cambodia, for instance, provide something like 60 or 70% of the protein in, the diets of that population. They've harmed the rice harvest in Vietnam. So,
and how did China harm the fisheries and the rice harvests? Like, what was the mechanism for that?
They control the flow, and there are cycles. When you got to, plant the rice, you got to feed the ponds and that sort of thing.
So there's natural cycles that fishermen and rice farmers are used to historically.
Right.
And then those change because China's arbitrarily changing them by releasing or holding water in the dams.
Yeah, there's a big drought a couple years ago in southern China, so they kept more water, and the rice harvest in Vietnam, if I remember the numbers right, 30, 40% below average harvest.
Oh, wow.
So anyway, back to this Great Bend Dam, I'm skeptical that they will ever build it, but they keep talking about it. They keep putting it in their 5-year plan.
I mean, is there something India can do or is doing to dissuade China from working on that project?
Well, they talk about it.
Right. I mean, we talk with China about climate change, but
right. I get frustrated when I try to understand what the Indian leadership is doing. I mean, I can find, the regional governor of the area that would be directly affected, says you can't trust the Chinese. We can't let them do this. But whether or not the national government will come in strongly, I can't find an answer to that question. I wish I could. But, we can talk about it as well. I mean, we negotiate with the Chinese over all kinds of stuff, right? That should be higher on the list. Deforestation in Brazil ought to be higher on the list of stuff we talk to them about.
So I remember we had a Bolivian activist on the show once, and she was talking about how China has encouraged the deforestation of the Amazon in Bolivia for beef production. So this is all over Latin America.